She brought the wolf into our home and thought she'd survive.
The phone rang at 30,000 feet, and my wife Jessica's voice crackled through the airplane's Wi-Fi like a confession at a funeral. Dean, I sold the farmhouse for $1 million and gave all the money to Brian. His business needed it more than we did. I stared at the seat back in front of me, wondering if the cabin pressure had finally scrambled my brain. Come again, sweetheart. Did you just say you sold our $9 million estate for pocket change? It's not pocket change. Brian's startup is going to revolutionize. Brian Voss? The same Brian who couldn't revolutionize a gas station hot dog without burning it? I kept my voice low, but the businessman next to me was already pretending not to eavesdrop. Jessica, please tell me this is some kind of joke? I'm not joking, Dean. The papers are signed, the money's transferred, and Brian's already investing it in his tech company. You should be proud of me for taking initiative. Initiative? Right, like a fox taking initiative in a hen house. Jessica, honey, there's just one tiny problem with your business acumen. You can't sell what you don't own. The deed to that farmhouse is in my mother's name, remember? The woman who specifically kept it that way because she didn't trust you as far as she could throw a combine harvester? Silence. Beautiful, telling silence. What do you mean I can't sell it? I mean you just committed fraud, sweetheart. Congratulations, you've graduated from a compulsive spending habit to federal crime. I was already flagging down the flight attendant. I'm coming home. Don't move anything else, don't sign anything else, and for the love of God, don't give Brian any more money. The flight back to Chicago felt like swimming through molasses. Every minute stretched into an hour as I imagined what I'd find at home. Jessica had been acting strange for months, more secretive, always out with friends, spending money like we'd struck oil in the back 40. I'd chalked it up to her usual restlessness, but apparently I'd underestimated her capacity for creative destruction. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Dean, there are strangers at the house with a moving truck. Jessica won't explain. Come home now. Perfect. Just perfect. The 3-hour drive from O'Hare to our little corner of rural Illinois gave me plenty of time to let my imagination run wild. But nothing could have prepared me for the circus I found in my driveway. A U-Haul truck sat parked next to Brian's flashy red Mustang. 2 men in coveralls were loading my antique dining room set into the truck while Jessica supervised, clipboard in hand like some demented estate sale coordinator. Her best friend Kylie stood nearby, live streaming the whole thing on her phone because apparently destroying your husband's life isn't worth doing unless you document it for social media. My 70-year-old mother sat on the front porch in her rocking chair, arms crossed, looking like a hawk watching mice play in an open field. She spotted my truck first. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she called out, her voice carrying that particular brand of prairie sarcasm that could strip paint. "Your wife's been explaining to me how she sold my house. Fascinating conversation." Jessica looked up from her clipboard, and I swear I saw her face go 3 shades paler. "Dean, you're back early." Funny how that works when your spouse commits felonies. I climbed out of my truck, taking in the scene with what I hoped looked like calm amusement. "So, Jessica, I'm curious. When exactly did you plan to mention that you don't actually own the property you sold?" Brian emerged from behind the moving truck, all swagger and nervous energy. At 35, he still dressed like he was trying to impress college girls. Designer jeans, untucked button-down shirt, and enough cologne to choke a horse. "Hey there, Dean. No hard feelings, right? This is just business." I looked at him for a long moment, then started laughing. Not the polite chuckle you give to a bad joke, but the kind of deep, genuine laughter that comes when the universe reveals just how beautifully absurd it can be. "Business," I repeated, wiping my eyes. "Brian, you magnificent disaster. You just bought stolen goods from someone who didn't own them. That's not business. That's performance art." Jessica stepped forward, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Dean, stop being dramatic. I was trying to help." "Help who exactly? Because it sure wasn't me. And it definitely wasn't the poor bastard who gave you $1 million for a house that was never yours to sell." I turned to the moving guys. "Gentlemen, I hate to interrupt your workday, but you're going to want to put that furniture back. This sale is about as legitimate as a $3 bill." One of the movers looked confused. "Ma'am, is this right?" Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. Kylie kept filming, probably sensing that this was about to get a lot more interesting. My mother stood up from her rocking chair, all 5 feet and 90 pounds of her, and fixed Jessica with a stare that could freeze heck. Young lady, would you care to explain to me how you sold a house that's been in the Rollins family for 3 generations? Because I'm genuinely curious about the legal theory behind that transaction. I thought, Jessica stammered. You thought wrong, I said, still smiling. But don't worry, sweetheart, we're going to fix this. We're going to fix all of it. Brian stepped forward, trying to salvage whatever authority he thought he had. Now hold on, Dean. Jessica and I had an agreement. Brian, I interrupted, my voice dropping to a conversational level that somehow felt more dangerous than shouting. I want you to get in your little red car and drive away, right now, before I decide that this situation needs a more hands-on approach. He looked around at the assembled crowd, my mother, the confused movers, Kylie with her phone, and Jessica clutching her fraudulent paperwork, and apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor. This isn't over, he said, but he was already backing toward his car. Oh, Brian, I called after him. It hasn't even started. The next morning, I sat in Sheriff Tom Halderman's office, drinking coffee that could strip rust and watching him read through Jessica's paperwork, with the expression of a man discovering his dog had learned to forge checks. Dean, I've seen some creative interpretations of property law in my time, but this, he held up the deed Jessica had apparently forged. This is something special. Your wife misspelled her own name on the signature line. Jessica never was good with details. I leaned back in the uncomfortable plastic chair. What are my options here, Tom? Tom Halderman had been sheriff of our little county for 15 years, and before that, he'd been my father's drinking buddy and my mother's second cousin. He was the kind of lawman who believed in handling family business with family solutions whenever possible. Well, legally speaking, she committed fraud, multiple felonies, actually. He set the papers down and fixed me with a look. But practically speaking, you might want to handle this quiet-like before it gets out of hand. Small towns have long memories, and Jessica's going to have to live with whatever reputation she builds for herself. What about Brian? Brian Voss is a different story. He's been running schemes around here for years, always just barely staying on the right side of legal. This time, he stepped over the line. Tom's smile was thin and predatory. I had a nice long conversation with him this morning. Seems he's suddenly very interested in returning that money he invested. I spent the rest of the morning at the bank with my mother, freezing every account Jessica had access to and documenting the fraudulent transfer. The bank manager, a nervous little man named Peterson, kept apologizing as if he'd personally handed Jessica the keys to Fort Knox. Mr. Rollins, I want you to know that we never would have processed this transaction if we'd known the circumstances. Peterson, my mother interrupted, you processed $1 million transfer based on forged documents without calling the actual property owner. I'd say your bank has bigger problems than apologizing. By noon, word had spread through town like wildfire in August. Rural communities are like living organisms. Information flows through them faster than blood through veins, and everybody knows everybody else's business before they know it themselves. I was grabbing lunch at Murphy's Diner when I overheard Dolores Murphy talking to her sister about that city girl who tried to sell the Rollins place out from under Dean's nose. The story had already grown in the telling. According to Dolores, Jessica had been planning this for months, and Brian was some kind of criminal mastermind from Chicago. That afternoon, I decided it was time for a more direct approach. I found Brian at Kowalski's Tavern, the kind of dive bar that serves beer in cans and doesn't ask too many questions about your day job. He was sitting at the far end of the bar, nursing a whiskey and looking like a man who just realized he'd bet the farm on a 3-legged horse. Brian, I said, sliding onto the stool next to him, you look like heck. He glanced up, his eyes bloodshot and nervous. Dean, look, about yesterday. Yesterday was interesting, I agreed, signaling the bartender for a beer. Today's going to be educational. The bartender, a grizzled ex-farmer named Chuck, set a cold Budweiser in front of me and gave Brian a look that suggested he'd already heard the story. In a town of 3,000 people, Brian's reputation had just taken a nosedive into a septic tank. I didn't know, Brian said quietly. Jessica told me the house was hers, said you were getting divorced and she needed to liquidate assets quickly. Divorced? I took a long pull from my beer. Brian, my friend, I think you've been getting played harder than a fiddle at a hoedown. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone, scrolling to a photo Jessica had posted on Facebook just 2 weeks ago. It showed us at our anniversary dinner, all smiles and loving poses with a caption about 15 wonderful years with my amazing husband. Brian stared at the photo like it was written in hieroglyphics. See, Brian, this is what we call a learning opportunity. You've been the other man in an affair, and you didn't even know it. I finished my beer and stood up. The question now is, what are you going to do about it? I'll get the money back. I'll make this right. Oh, you'll definitely get the money back. Sheriff Halderman was very clear about that. I dropped a 10 on the bar. But Brian, here's some free advice. When you're in a hole, the first rule is to stop digging. I was halfway to the door when I heard him call after me. Dean, wait. There's something else you should know. I turned back, eyebrows raised. This wasn't the first time. Jessica's been borrowing money from your accounts for months. Small amounts, nothing you'd notice right away, but it adds up. The bar had gone quiet. Chuck was polishing glasses with the focused intensity of a man pretending not to listen to the most interesting conversation he'd heard all year. How much, Brian? Maybe 50,000, maybe more. I walked back to the bar, my footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Brian was staring into his whiskey like it might offer absolution. $50,000, I repeated. And what was that money for? Her gambling debts. She's been playing online poker, sports betting, some kind of cryptocurrency thing. She owes money to people who don't send polite reminder letters. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that was both clearer and uglier than I'd imagined. Jessica hadn't just betrayed me. She'd been systematically robbing me to fund her destructive habits and pay her debts. Brian, I said, my voice conversational and friendly, I want you to understand something very clearly. You're going to return every penny of that $1 million. And you're going to help me document every transaction Jessica made with my money. You're going to cooperate fully with whatever legal proceedings come next. And you're going to do all of this with a smile on your face and gratitude in your heart. And if I don't, I leaned closer, close enough that only he could hear me, then I'm going to make sure every person in this county knows exactly what kind of man you are. I'm going to tell them about the married woman you've been screwing, the money you stole, and the lies you told. I'm going to make your name synonymous with snake oil and bad checks. And Brian? I straightened up, smiling broadly. In a town this size, reputation is the only currency that matters. And you're about to be bankrupt. I left him sitting there, staring into his whiskey, while Chuck and the other regulars watched me walk out like I'd just performed some kind of magic trick. Outside, I sat in my truck for a moment, processing what I'd learned. Jessica wasn't just unfaithful. She was desperate, in debt, and apparently willing to destroy everything we'd built to save herself. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother. Jessica's packing. Says she's going to stay with Kylie until this misunderstanding gets sorted out. I told her not to let the door hit her on the way out. I started the truck and headed home, already planning my next move. Jessica thought she could steal from me, lie to me, and humiliate me, then just wait for the dust to settle. She was about to learn how wrong she was. I spent the next 3 days playing the role of the confused, hurt husband while quietly building my case. Jessica had moved in with Kylie, who lived in a cramped apartment above the town's only hair salon. Every morning, I'd see Jessica's car parked outside the coffee shop, and every afternoon, she'd drive out to Brian's rented house on Maple Street. The beautiful thing about small towns is that privacy is an illusion. Everyone sees everything. And if you know how to ask the right questions, people are happy to share what they've observed. Mrs. Henderson, who lived across from Brian's place, mentioned that Jessica had been visiting regularly for months, usually staying for hours at a time. The postal worker, Dave Martinez, confirmed that Jessica had been receiving mail at Brian's address. Even the teenager who delivered groceries for the local market had stories about seeing Jessica's car there at odd hours. But I needed more than gossip. I needed proof. On Thursday morning, I borrowed my cousin Pete's pickup truck and parked it at the end of Maple Street, just close enough to see Brian's driveway, but far enough away to avoid suspicion. I'd installed a dash cam in Pete's truck, the kind long-haul truckers use to document accidents. If Jessica and Brian were still conducting business together, I wanted it on record. I didn't have to wait long. At 10:30 a.m., Jessica's white Honda pulled into Brian's driveway. She sat in the car for several minutes, apparently talking on the phone, before getting out and walking to the front door. She was carrying a manila envelope. 15 minutes later, Brian emerged from the house, got in his Mustang, and drove toward the business district. Jessica followed in her Honda, maintaining a careful distance. I followed them both. They ended up at First National Bank, where they sat in Brian's car for another 10 minutes before going inside together. Through the bank's large windows, I could see them talking to a loan officer, with Jessica occasionally gesturing emphatically. I parked across the street and called my friend Dave Martinez, who worked as a teller at First National. Dave, it's Dean Rollins. I need a favor. Sure thing, Dean. What's up? My wife and Brian Voss are in your bank right now, probably trying to open some kind of account or apply for a loan. I need to know what they're up to. There was a pause. Dean, you know I can't share customer information. Dave? They defrauded me out of $1 million. Sheriff Halderman is building a case, and anything you can tell me might help prevent them from stealing from someone else. Another pause, longer this time. They tried to open a joint business account, Dave said quietly. Said they were starting an investment company together. But when we ran the credit checks, Brian's got more red flags than a Chinese parade. We turned them down. What about Jessica? Her credit's clean, but she can't open business accounts right now because of some kind of freeze on her personal accounts. She got pretty upset about that. After they left the bank, I followed them to a small office building on the outskirts of town. The sign out front read, Midwest Business Solutions in faded letters. They went inside and stayed for over an hour. While I waited, I did some research on my phone. Midwest Business Solutions was a business incubator that specialized in helping entrepreneurs get started. Their website was full of stock photos and vague promises about turning dreams into reality. The kind of place that charges desperate people money for advice they could get free at the library. When Jessica and Brian finally emerged, they were arguing. I couldn't hear the words, but their body language told the story. Jessica was angry, gesturing sharply, while Brian looked defensive and frustrated. They got in their separate cars and drove off in different directions. I followed Jessica. She drove straight to the Riverside Motel, a rundown place on the edge of town that rented rooms by the hour or the week, depending on your needs. She parked in front of room 12 and knocked on the door. A man I didn't recognize answered. Tall, thin, wearing a cheap suit that had seen better days. Jessica handed him an envelope. They talked for a few minutes, and then she left. I waited until her car was out of sight, then walked over to the motel office. The clerk was a heavy-set woman in her 50s, reading a romance novel and smoking a cigarette, despite the no smoking sign on the wall. Excuse me, I said. I'm supposed to meet my business partner in room 12, but I forgot his name. Tall guy, thin, wearing a gray suit. She looked up from her book. You mean Mr. Castellanos? He checked in yesterday, paid cash for 3 nights. Said he was here on business. That's him, thanks. Castellanos. The name meant nothing to me, but the cash payment and cheap motel suggested he wasn't exactly a Fortune 500 executive. I spent the rest of the afternoon making phone calls and doing online research. By evening, I had a clearer picture of what Jessica and Brian were up to. Mr. Castellanos was a small-time con artist with a history of investment fraud in 3 states. He specialized in something called advance fee schemes, convincing people to pay upfront costs for business loans or investment opportunities that never materialized. Jessica and Brian weren't trying to legitimately invest the money they'd stolen from me. They were trying to multiply it through another scam, probably hoping to pay me back and keep the profits. The beautiful irony was that they were about to be scammed themselves. That evening, I called Sheriff Halderman and shared what I'd learned. He listened without comment, occasionally grunting or asking for clarification. Dean, he said when I finished, you realize you've been conducting surveillance without a license? I've been driving around my own town, Tom. Last I checked, that wasn't illegal. Fair enough. What do you want me to do with this information? Nothing yet. Let them dig their hole a little deeper. But when they fall in, I want to make sure they can't climb back out. You're playing a dangerous game, Dean. These people are desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. Tom, they already did the stupid thing. Now they're just living with the consequences. After I hung up, I sat on my front porch with a beer, watching the sun set over the fields I'd grown up working. My mother came out and settled into the rocking chair beside me. You look like a man with a plan, she said. I look like a man whose wife tried to steal his life. Same thing, really. She rocked gently, the chair creaking in rhythm. Your father used to say that revenge is a dish best served cold, but I always thought that was nonsense. Revenge is like farming. You plant the seeds, tend them carefully, and harvest them when they're ripe. What are you saying, Mom? I'm saying Jessica's planted her seeds, and now it's time to see what kind of crop she's going to harvest. The next morning, I put my plan into motion. Friday morning, I called a meeting with everyone who mattered. Sheriff Halderman, my lawyer, Dave Peterson, my mother, and surprisingly, the man Jessica had sold our house to, a retired engineer from Springfield named Robert Chen, who'd been looking for rural property to convert into a weekend retreat. We met at Dave's office, a converted Victorian house on Main Street that smelled like old books and fresh coffee. Chen was a soft-spoken man in his 60s who seemed more embarrassed than angry about being caught up in Jessica's scheme. "Mr. Rollins," he said, "I want you to know that I had no idea the sale was fraudulent. Your wife seemed very knowledgeable about the property, and she had all the paperwork." "Mr. Chen," I interrupted, "you're the victim here, not the criminal. Jessica forged documents and Brian helped her do it. You were just trying to buy a house." "What happens now?" "I've already transferred the money, and my wife and I were planning to move in next month." I looked around the room at the assembled faces, then smiled. "Mr. Chen, how would you like to buy the house legitimately?" My mother raised an eyebrow. "Dean, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Mr. Chen deserves to get what he paid for, and Jessica deserves to learn that actions have consequences." I turned to Dave. "Can we structure a real sale? Market value, proper documentation, everything legal and above board?" Dave nodded slowly. "The house is worth about $1.8 million at current market rates. If Mr. Chen is willing to pay fair market value—" "I am," Chen said quickly. "I fell in love with that property the moment I saw it. If you're willing to sell it legitimately, I'll pay whatever it's worth." "Excellent." I turned to Sheriff Halderman. "Tom, what's the status on getting that $1 million back from Brian?" "He's been very cooperative since our last conversation. The money's been returned to an escrow account pending resolution of the fraud case." "Perfect. Here's what I propose. Mr. Chen pays $1.8 million for the house. We use $1 million of that to reimburse him for the money he lost to Jessica's scam. That leaves $800,000 profit, which my mother and I will split since she's the legal owner." My mother was grinning now. "And what about Jessica and Brian? They get exactly what they earned. Nothing, plus criminal charges for fraud, theft, and conspiracy." Dave was taking notes furiously. "Dean, this is brilliant. It's completely legal. It makes the victim whole, and it ensures that the criminals don't profit from their crimes." "There's just one more thing I want to add," I said. "I want to hold a public auction for all the personal property Jessica tried to steal, right here in town with full media coverage. Let everyone see exactly what she was trying to do." Sheriff Halderman chuckled. "Dean, you're not just getting revenge. You're putting on a show." "Tom, in a town this size, sometimes the show is the revenge." We spent the next 2 hours working out the details. The sale would be finalized the following Wednesday. The auction would be held Saturday afternoon in the town square, with proceeds going to the local volunteer fire department. Most importantly, we'd make sure Jessica and Brian knew about both events well in advance. I was curious to see how they'd react. I didn't have to wait long to find out. That afternoon, Kylie called me, her voice shrill with indignation. "Dean Rollins, how dare you humiliate Jessica like this? She made one mistake and you're trying to ruin her entire life." "Kylie, sweetheart, Jessica made about 50,000 mistakes, each one worth $1, but who's counting? She's my best friend and she's devastated. She's been crying for 3 days straight. Has she been crying about betraying her husband, stealing his money, and committing fraud? Or is she crying because she got caught?" There was a pause. "She says you've frozen all her accounts, and she can't even buy groceries. That's what happens when you steal from your spouse, Kylie. It's called consequences. Look it up. You're being cruel. I'm being fair. There's a difference." After I hung up, I felt a twinge of something that might have been guilt. Jessica and I had been married for 15 years. We'd built a life together, shared dreams and disappointments, weathered the normal ups and downs of any long relationship. But then I remembered the manila envelope she'd handed to that con artist at the motel, and the guilt evaporated like morning dew. She hadn't just betrayed me once in a moment of weakness. She'd been systematically deceiving me for months, stealing from me, planning to leave me, and apparently trying to multiply her theft through another criminal scheme. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. Saturday morning dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for a public auction. I arrived at the town square early to help set up tables and organize the items Jessica had tried to steal: antique furniture, family heirlooms, artwork, even some of my farming equipment she'd apparently thought she could sell. By noon, half the county had shown up. Word had spread about the fraud auction, and people were curious to see the drama unfold. The local newspaper had sent a reporter, and someone had even called the regional TV station. Jessica and Brian arrived together at 12:30, just as the auctioneer was getting started. They parked across the street and sat in Brian's Mustang, watching the proceedings with expressions of pure misery. The first item up for bid was our antique dining room set, the one Jessica had been loading into the moving truck when I'd arrived home. The bidding started at $50 and quickly escalated as neighbors competed for pieces they'd admired for years. "Do I hear 300? The auctioneer called out. "350! Someone shouted from the back of the crowd. I looked across the street and saw Jessica slump in the passenger seat of Brian's car. The dining room set sold for $800. A Victorian-era wardrobe went for $600. Even my old tractor, which I'd been planning to replace anyway, brought in $1,200. But the real entertainment came when Sheriff Halderman took the microphone. "Folks, I want to thank you all for coming out today and supporting our volunteer fire department. I also want to take this opportunity to remind everyone that fraud is a serious crime with serious consequences. If anyone has information about fraudulent sales, forged documents, or theft, please contact my office immediately." He looked directly at Brian's Mustang as he spoke. "We take property crimes very seriously in this county, and we will prosecute offenders to the fullest extent of the law." Across the street, Brian started his car and drove away, leaving Jessica sitting alone on a park bench, crying. The auction raised nearly $15,000 for the fire department. More importantly, it sent a message that resonated through the community. Actions have consequences, and those consequences can be very public. As the crowd began to disperse, my mother walked over and put her hand on my arm. "Your father would be proud," she said quietly. "You handled this with class." "It's not over yet, Mom. Jessica and Brian are still out there, probably planning their next move. Let them plan. You've got the high ground now, and they're the ones who have to live with what they've done." That evening, I got a phone call from Dave Peterson. "Dean, we have a problem. Jessica's hired a lawyer from Chicago, some hotshot who specializes in marital property disputes. He's claiming that Jessica has a right to half the value of the house regardless of who holds the deed. Can he make that stick? Maybe. Illinois is a community property state, which means assets acquired during marriage are generally considered joint property. If Jessica can prove she contributed to the household or helped maintain the property, she might have a claim." I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. "So she steals from me, commits fraud, and now she might get paid for it?" "Not necessarily. Her lawyer doesn't know about the gambling debts, the systematic theft from your accounts, or her relationship with Brian. If we can prove she was planning to leave you and take half your assets, that changes everything." "What do you need from me?" "Evidence. Phone records, bank statements, anything that shows premeditation. And Dean? Yeah, you might want to prepare yourself for a fight. Jessica's not going quietly." After I hung up, I walked out to the front porch and sat in my father's old rocking chair, looking out over the fields that had been in my family for 3 generations. Jessica thought she could take half of everything I'd worked for, everything my parents had built. She was about to learn that some fights are worth having, regardless of the cost. Jessica's Chicago lawyer was a shark in an expensive suit named Marcus Goldstein, and he wasted no time going on the offensive. Monday morning, I found a process server waiting in my driveway with papers demanding half the value of everything: the house, the land, the farm equipment, even my business accounts. According to the filing, Jessica was claiming 15 years of unpaid domestic labor and seeking compensation for her contributions to the household economy. The document painted her as a devoted wife who had sacrificed her career to support her husband's agricultural business. It was a masterpiece of creative fiction. I called Dave Peterson immediately. "They're claiming she was an unpaid farm worker," I told him. "Dave, Jessica wouldn't know a soybean from a kidney bean if her life depended on it. Her idea of contributing to the farm was complaining about the smell." "Dean, calm down. We expected this. Goldstein's reputation is built on aggressive tactics and media manipulation. He's trying to make you react emotionally. Well, it's working. Don't let it. We have ammunition he doesn't know about, and we're going to use it strategically." That afternoon, I drove to Brian's house on Maple Street. His red Mustang was in the driveway, but when I knocked on the door, no one answered. I could hear movement inside, so I walked around to the backyard and found Brian loading boxes into a rental truck. "Going somewhere, Brian?" He spun around, nearly dropping the box he was carrying. "Dean, I didn't hear you come up." "Funny thing about that. When you're sneaking around, you tend to miss things." I gestured at the truck. "Planning a vacation?" Just reorganizing, getting rid of some stuff I don't need. I walked closer and peered into one of the boxes. It was full of financial documents, bank statements, and what looked like business correspondence. Brian, you wouldn't be trying to destroy evidence, would you? Because that would be a separate felony on top of the fraud charges you're already facing. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just cleaning house. Uh-huh. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of the truck, the boxes, and Brian's panicked expression. You know what I think, Brian? I think you and Jessica are planning to run. I think you've realized that your little scam fell apart and now you're trying to disappear before the consequences catch up with you. We're not running anywhere. Really? Then you won't mind if I call Sheriff Halderman and let him know you're packing up right in the middle of a criminal investigation. Brian set down the box and wiped sweat from his forehead. What do you want, Dean? I want the truth, all of it. How long have you and Jessica been planning this? How much money did she steal from me? And what were you planning to do with that con artist at the motel? Brian looked around nervously, as if he expected Jessica to appear and save him from having to answer. 6 months, he said finally. Jessica came to me 6 months ago, said she was drowning in gambling debts and needed help. She'd been taking money from your accounts, but it wasn't enough to cover what she owed. How much did she owe? 75,000, maybe 80. She was betting on sports, playing online poker, some cryptocurrency thing that went bad. The people she owed money to weren't the kind who accept payment plans. So, you decided to steal my house. It wasn't supposed to be stealing. Jessica said you were rich, that you'd never even miss $1 million. She said the house was worth way more than that anyway, so it was like taking a small loan. I stared at him. Brian, do you hear yourself? You're talking about stealing $1 million like it's borrowing a cup of sugar? We were going to pay it back. Castellanos promised us he could double the money in 6 months through some kind of international investment scheme. We would have been able to pay you back and still have enough to cover Jessica's debts. And you believed him? Brian's shoulders sagged. We wanted to believe him. We needed to believe him. Where's Jessica now, Brian? She's at Kylie's, planning her next move with that lawyer from Chicago. What next move? She thinks if she can get half the value of your property in the divorce, she can pay off her debts and start over somewhere else. Goldstein told her she has a good case. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Jessica's planning to divorce me. She filed papers this morning. I stood there for a long moment processing this information. Jessica hadn't just stolen from me and betrayed me. She was planning to destroy me financially and then disappear with half of everything I owned. Brian, I said quietly, I want you to do something for me. What? I want you to call Jessica and tell her that you're ready to run. Tell her you've got a plan to disappear, maybe go to Mexico or Canada, somewhere they can't extradite you. Tell her you want her to come with you. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, I'm going to make sure Sheriff Halderman knows about every crime you've committed in the last 6 months. And Brian? I stepped closer, close enough that he could see I wasn't bluffing. I'm going to make sure everyone in this county knows what kind of man you really are. Your family, your friends, your business associates, they're all going to know that you're a thief and a liar who seduces married women and steals from hardworking people. Brian swallowed hard. And if I do what you want, then maybe I'll put in a good word for you when this all goes to trial. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands. 20 minutes later, Jessica's Honda pulled into Brian's driveway. She got out of the car looking haggard and desperate, her usually perfect hair disheveled and her makeup smeared from crying. I was watching from across the street, parked behind a delivery truck where I could see everything but remain hidden. Jessica and Brian talked for several minutes in his driveway, their voices raised in what was clearly an argument. Finally, Jessica threw her hands up in frustration and got back in her car. But instead of leaving, she drove around the block and parked in front of the house next door, where she sat watching Brian's place. My phone buzzed with a text from Brian. She doesn't trust me. Says she thinks you're planning something. I texted back. She's right. Keep loading the truck. Make it look real. For the next hour, Brian continued his performance, carrying boxes and furniture out to the rental truck while Jessica watched from her car. Finally, she got out and walked over to him. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language told the story. Jessica was angry and scared. Brian was trying to convince her of something. Eventually, she nodded and went into the house with him. That's when I called Sheriff Halderman. Tom, they're both at Brian's house right now. probably planning to flee the jurisdiction. You might want to have a conversation with them before they disappear. On my way. I stayed hidden until I saw Tom's patrol car pull into Brian's driveway. Through the house's front window, I could see Jessica and Brian scrambling around, probably trying to hide evidence or destroy documents. Tom knocked on the front door, waited a moment, then walked around to the backyard where the rental truck was parked. A few minutes later, he came back around front with both Jessica and Brian in tow. Even from across the street, I could see that Jessica was crying, and Brian looked like he was about to throw up. Tom spent about 20 minutes talking to them in the driveway, occasionally gesturing at the truck or pointing back at the house. Finally, he got in his car and drove away, leaving Jessica and Brian standing there looking like they'd just been hit by a tornado. My phone rang. "Dean, it's Tom. You need to know that your wife and her boyfriend were definitely planning to run. I found plane tickets to Mexico, fake IDs, and about $20,000 in cash." "What did you tell them?" "I told them that fleeing the jurisdiction would be considered an admission of guilt, and that I'd have federal marshals tracking them down within 24 hours. I also told them that their best bet was to cooperate fully with the investigation and hope for leniency." "Are they going to run anyway?" "I don't think so. They're too scared and too stupid to pull off a successful escape." "But Dean, yeah? You need to be careful. Desperate people do desperate things, and your wife is about as desperate as they come." That evening, I sat in my kitchen making a list of everything Jessica had stolen, everything she'd destroyed, and everything she was still trying to take from me. The numbers were staggering: nearly $100,000 in direct theft, $1 million in attempted fraud, and now she was demanding half of everything I owned in the divorce. But it wasn't really about the money anymore. It was about justice. Jessica had spent months lying to me, stealing from me, and planning to destroy my life. She'd brought criminals into my home, forged legal documents, and tried to steal property that had been in my family for generations. Now she was trying to play the victim, claiming she deserved half of everything because she'd been a devoted wife. It was time to show her what devotion really looked like. I picked up my phone and called Marcus Goldstein's office in Chicago. "Mr. Goldstein, this is Dean Rollins. I understand you're representing my wife in our divorce proceedings." "Mr. Rollins, you shouldn't be calling me directly. All communication should go through your attorney. I just wanted to let you know that I am looking forward to our day in court. I think the judge is going to be very interested in hearing about Jessica's gambling problem, her systematic theft from our joint accounts, her affair with Brian Voss, and her attempt to defraud an innocent home buyer." There was a long pause. "Mr. Rollins, I think there may be some misunderstandings about the facts of this case." "No misunderstandings, counselor, just facts. Documented, witnessed, recorded facts. I'll see you in court." I hung up and smiled for the first time in days. The war was just beginning, and I intended to win it. The divorce hearing was scheduled for the following Friday, but Jessica and her lawyer made their move on Wednesday night. I was in my workshop, an old barn I'd converted into a combination office and repair shop, when I heard vehicles in my driveway. Through the window, I could see Brian's Mustang and a black SUV I didn't recognize. I turned off the lights and watched as Jessica, Brian, and two men in dark clothing got out of the vehicles. One of the strangers was carrying what looked like a crowbar. They were planning to break into my house. I pulled out my phone and called emergency, whispering my location and the situation to the dispatcher. Then I called Sheriff Halderman directly. "Tom, they're here. Jessica, Brian, and two other guys. They're about to break into my house." "Stay where you are, Dean. Don't try to be a hero. We're on our way." I watched from the workshop as the four figures approached my front door. Jessica was gesturing and pointing, apparently giving directions. One of the strangers used the crowbar to force open the door, and they all went inside. For the next 10 minutes, I could see lights moving around inside the house as they searched for something. Occasionally, I'd hear the sound of furniture being moved or drawers being opened. Then I saw more headlights coming up the driveway. Sheriff Halderman arrived with two deputies and a state police car. They positioned their vehicles to block the driveway, then approached the house with their tools drawn. "This is the sheriff's department!" Tom's voice boomed through a bullhorn. "Come out of the house with your hands visible!" The lights inside the house went out immediately. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Then the front door opened, and Jessica stumbled out, her hands raised, crying hysterically. "Don't shoot! Please don't shoot! This is my house! I live here!" "Ma'am, step away from the door and keep your hands where we can see them." Brian came out next, followed by the two strangers. In the glare of the police spotlights, I could see that one of them was the con artist from the motel, Castellanos. The other was a heavyset man I didn't recognize. All four were handcuffed and placed in separate patrol cars. Tom walked over to the workshop and knocked on the door. "Dean, it's safe to come out." I emerged from my hiding spot, adrenaline still pumping through my system. What were they looking for? Bank records, financial documents, anything they could use to support Jessica's claim that she deserves half your assets. They were also looking for cash. Apparently, Jessica told them you keep large amounts of money in the house. Did they find anything? They found your safe, but they couldn't get it open. They made a mess of your office and bedroom, though. I looked at my house, my family's house, with its broken front door and shattered sense of security. Tom, I want to press charges, all of them. Breaking and entering, burglary, conspiracy, whatever you can make stick. Already in the works, but Dean, there's something else you need to know. What? Castellanos is wanted in 3 states for investment fraud. The FBI has been looking for him for 6 months. When they find out we've got him in custody, this is going to become a federal case. What does that mean for Jessica and Brian? It means they're not just facing local charges anymore. They're looking at federal conspiracy charges, which carry much stiffer penalties. The next morning, the story was front-page news in the county newspaper. Local woman arrested in home invasion plot. The article detailed Jessica's affair, the fraudulent house sale, and her connection to a wanted federal fugitive. By noon, the story had been picked up by regional media outlets. By evening, it was trending on social media with hashtags like #farmhouse_revenge and #karmafarm. Jessica's lawyer, Marcus Goldstein, withdrew from the case that afternoon, citing irreconcilable differences with his client regarding legal strategy. Friday morning, I sat in the courthouse waiting for what was supposed to be our divorce hearing. Instead, Jessica was appearing via video link from the county jail, wearing an orange jumpsuit and looking like she hadn't slept in days. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Margaret Chen, no relation to the man who bought my house, reviewed the case file with obvious disgust. "Mrs. Rollins, I see here that you're facing federal charges for conspiracy, fraud, and burglary. You're also accused of systematic theft from marital accounts totaling nearly $100,000. Is this correct?" Jessica's court-appointed lawyer, a young public defender who looked overwhelmed, whispered something to her. "Yes, Your Honor, but I was desperate. I had gambling debts, and I was afraid. Mrs. Rollins, I'm not interested in your excuses. I'm interested in the facts. Did you or did you not systematically steal money from accounts you shared with your husband?" "Yes, but did you or did you not attempt to fraudulently sell property that didn't belong to you?" "Yes, but I was trying to save our marriage." "Mrs. Rollins, you were trying to save yourself at your husband's expense. This court has reviewed all the evidence, including bank records, witness statements, and recorded conversations. Your claim for half of the marital assets is denied." Jessica started crying again. "Your Honor, please. I have nothing. No money, no job, no place to live." "Mrs. Rollins, you should have thought about that before you decided to become a criminal." Judge Chen turned to me. "Mr. Rollins, this court finds that your wife systematically defrauded you and attempted to steal marital property through criminal means. You're awarded full ownership of all marital assets, including the family home, business accounts, and personal property. Mrs. Rollins will receive nothing. Thank you, Your Honor. Furthermore, this court is ordering Mrs. Rollins to make restitution for the money she stole from joint accounts. If she cannot pay immediately, her wages will be garnished until the debt is satisfied." Jessica was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. "Mrs. Rollins, you brought this situation on yourself through your own criminal actions. This court has no sympathy for criminals who prey on their own families." The hearing was over in less than 20 minutes. Afterward, I stood on the courthouse steps, breathing the crisp autumn air and feeling something I hadn't felt in months: peace. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Justice served. Your father would be proud." A reporter from the local newspaper approached me. "Mr. Rollins, how does it feel to have your name cleared and your property restored?" I thought about it for a moment. "It feels like the end of a very long nightmare," I said. "My wife chose to steal from me, lie to me, and try to destroy everything my family built over 3 generations. She chose to bring criminals into our home and put our community at risk. Those were her choices, and now she's living with the consequences. Do you have any regrets about how this all played out?" "My only regret is that I trusted someone who didn't deserve it. But I learned something important. When people show you who they really are, believe them. That evening, I sat on my front porch, newly repaired and more secure than ever, watching the sun set over fields that would remain in my family for another generation. Brian Voss was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for conspiracy and fraud. Castellanos got 15 years for multiple counts of investment fraud across several states. Jessica received 3 years with the possibility of parole in 18 months if she completed a gambling recovery program and maintained steady employment. The house sold to Robert Chen for the agreed-upon price, and he turned it into the weekend retreat he'd originally envisioned. He and his wife became good neighbors, and we often shared coffee on Sunday mornings. I used part of the money from the sale to expand my agricultural technology business, which had grown significantly during the drama of the divorce. Apparently, the media attention had been good for business. Farmers across the Midwest wanted to work with that guy who outsmarted the con artists. My mother moved into a smaller house in town, but visited regularly to make sure I was eating properly and to offer unsolicited advice about my love life. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received a letter from Jessica in prison. She apologized for everything she'd done and asked if I could ever forgive her. I read the letter once, then burned it in my fireplace. Some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness, and some bridges are meant to stay burned. I never remarried, but I built a good life for myself. I traveled, expanded my business, and eventually became something of a local legend. The farmer who took down a criminal conspiracy and got justice for himself and his community. People still talk about it at Murphy's Diner and Kowalski's Tavern. They call it the farmhouse revenge, and the story gets a little bigger each time it's told. I don't mind. Sometimes a man's legacy is measured not by what he builds, but by what he refuses to let others tear down. Jessica thought she could steal my life, destroy my family's heritage, and walk away with half of everything I'd worked for. She was wrong.